We're live.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the regularly scheduled meeting of Mahone Bay Town Council. All of our councilors are here tonight, as well as a couple of members of staff. We'll be following the agenda that had been published on the town's Facebook page. And when the meeting is over, if the people who may be watching us from home on YouTube have some questions, we would address the questions at that time. So if you would save your questions until the end of the meeting, and we do have an in-camera session which will follow this particular portion of the meeting, which is an in-camera session is only available to members of council. So with that, councilors, welcome. Good evening. You have an agenda that was emailed to you. What is your preference with the agenda? Councilor Carver?
The agenda be accepted as circulated.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councilor Now seconds. Moved and seconded to accept the agenda as presented. Does anyone have any question? All in favor? The motion is carried. Thank you. Let's go right to the minutes of the regular meeting of March 25th. What is your wish? Councilor Wilson?
Move to accept the minutes as circulated.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councilor Burdick? All of the motions moved and seconded to accept the minutes as presented. Comments on the question? All in favor? The motion is carried. Thank you. Let's go. There are no presentations. Let's go right to the correspondence. The action items. We have one action item from Mickey Johnson. Councilor Feeney.
Mayor, I'd move that council direct staff to draft a letter of response to Ms. Johnson, thanking her for her correspondence dated March 25th, 2021, noting the council's permissions not required for a survey and indicating that the town currently has no intention to revisit the use of the town's existing corporate logo for corporate purposes.
Thank you. Do we, Councilor Carver?
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. Councilor Wilson, and then Deputy Mayor.
My only concern about this, Councilor Feeney's motion is, and I don't know that I circulated this to everybody or not, but is the outstanding, I think it's the outstanding motion from April 14th of last year that reads, therefore be it resolved that following the community branding public engagement component of the wayfinding project and the community vision public engagement component of the municipal plan review, council will formally revisit its commitment to the use of the current 3 diamond design as its corporate logo with the understanding that the current blah, blah, blah. My concern is this. The way I've been told that motion reads that if there is any feedback from those 2 studies that we would act. But that's not what the motion says. What the motion says unequivocally is after those studies are done, we will formally revisit. Now, I wasn't there, so I don't know what the intent of council was, and I'd love to hear from the councilors who were there what they meant by that, and if they meant pending the results of those studies, we will revisit it, rather than what it says in the motion, then I'm fine. But otherwise, I think we either have to get rid of that motion or do something with it.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Kangata.
So similar to that, in addition to that, I think council, when we discussed this last time, I said this and I'll say it again. Council is not listening to residents when they raise this issue, and I think if we want to live the values that we've stated in our strategic plan, we ought to listen to the residents. And so last time when this issue came to the table, we actually did not revisit it the way it was supposed to, based on what the motion that Councillor Wilson read. We basically had I would call a partial, feedback on one piece of the concerns that had been raised, and that I think had to do with accessibility. We did not really discuss the issue of, is this the logo that we want to go forward with, which from my perspective, the initial motion talks about. So I think we need to address that. Otherwise, this thing keeps coming back. It doesn't help in terms of our relationship with residents. We can resolve it, and all we need is to put out the goodwill that we want to listen to residents.
I was muted. CAO, you're next, and then Councillor Burdick.
I just wanted to make it clear for the record that those two conditions referenced in the motion had been met. Now, whether council feels that sufficient discussion has taken place, that's council's prerogative, obviously, to decide. But the conditions established in the motion of April of last year as to where we would be in the plan review and wayfinding processes, there was a report to council January 28th, and I think Councillor Wilson does know this and wasn't trying to suggest otherwise, that indicated that those conditions had been met. Now, at this point, council, of course, could have further discussion, but staff don't have any other reports to provide. So I just wanted to clarify that that's all on the record at this point.
Thank you. Councillor Burdick?
Thank you. I guess my question would be, at this point, if we have this motion to correspond and say that yes, citizens can carry out this poll, that's excellent. But then with the results of that, what then happens? Is it simply a recreational thing for citizens to do, or is there a point where the sort of various correspondences and discussions become, I guess, a more engaged involvement with the repeating question? As the deputy mayor has mentioned, and as Councillor Wilson have mentioned, it does keep coming up repeatedly, and it would be so good if there were a fairly simple way of finding out truly what people want. If they find the logo acceptable as it stands at this point, that would be great information for the town to have, just as it would be great information for the town to have, to know that a considerable number of people do not want it as it stands. I just think it's going to be a repeating, and as it has been in the very few months that I've been on here, it's come up a few times already. And this is a question I would have for my fellow councillors and mayor and the CAO is then what do we do if a poll comes back to us saying, with information, do we just again receive it and say, thanks for that?
Councillor Feeney?
So, I think Councillor Burdick makes great points, and I agree with them. At this point, I think logistically, we have a letter from a citizen asking town council to provide permission for a survey, and it's permission that the citizen doesn't require from us. So I think this motion indicates that, and I think reasonable people, if there's future information that shows up down the road, then council will deal with that at this time. But what we have tonight on the 12th of April is we have a letter saying, council, please provide me permission to do something. And I guess what this motion speaks to is, I'm not trying to get the cart before the horse. I'm just saying this evening, what we're doing is we're responding to that letter, and we're saying that tonight, Like, we don't have any plans on record to revisit the topic. But things change. And at some point down the road, if information comes back to council, then, we will deal with that in due course. But we do have a letter that was given to us 3 weeks ago. And I think we need to be able to respond to that letter tonight, but we only need to respond to it in the context of the facts on the table as they exist tonight, not what they may be a year from now. So I think, the motion in my mind is kind of clear on next steps, and I wouldn't want to predetermine the future. Who knows where we'll end up?
Thank you. Deputy Mayor?
And trying to figure out a good way to say this, but I think from my perspective, when I listen to the motion, I find that it's not being honest about the topic of the table, in the sense that the way the way residents have come to council might be, from my perspective, not in their best interest, because the approach to ask for permission that is not required basically renders that feedback that we're giving them. So I think if we truly are honest, and I remember when we're talking about the value of honesty at the strategic planning session, is yes, there's transparency, but there's honesty. If we truly are honest about the entire thing, residents have shown us they're not happy with the logo. I am not advocating for one logo or the other. What I'm advocating for is, let's listen to them and sort of say, let's revisit the logo and figure out as a process, as council, what kind of process do we need to go through so that we are satisfied that a majority of the residents we have in Mahone Bay are supportive of the logo that we've chosen. For me, that's I guess the simple way I can look at it, rather than kicking the ball back and forth and kicking it further, which you've done a few times, and it's not really helping us.
If I could, Deputy Mayor, since the logo has been first introduced, it has been discussed at council. It has been published in council documents. It was approved. New information arrived. The approval was rescinded. We looked at the issue again. It was approved a second time. There was a petition circulated in which 66 citizens, 66 out of 850, indicated they were not happy with the logo, far from any kind of a majority of citizens. And the discussions that have gone on since then have shown some people that are quite open and vocal about being opposed to the new logo for a variety of reasons. A number of people have expressed their own sentiment being in support of the new logo. I don't think this is a question of being honest. I think council has followed the steps that were in place with regard to citizen engagement from the beginning. We changed the rules halfway through. We embraced a new policy of citizen engagement. I don't think that the issue here is one of honesty. Councillor Wilson, and then Deputy Mayor again.
Thank you. I'm sorry to get stuck on this technicality, but notwithstanding the CAO's comments, the motion that I read to you was not conditional, and there were no conditions in that motion to be met by that report in January or any other report. What it said was we would revisit it after those reports were filed. Now, my question was to former councillors is, did they mean that motion to be conditional? And I didn't get an answer to that, so I'm going to directly ask through the mayor, Councillor Carver, it's your motion. Are you happy that these so-called conditions have been met? If so, I'm happy to vote in favor and move on.
Councillor Carver, and then we'll go back to Deputy Mayor. Deputy Mayor, if you would, Councillor Carver will address Councillor Wilson's point. Councillor Carver?
Thank you. The motion was made in the spirit of having a bit of distance from the process that had gone on in November, December 2019. And to anticipate that there would be a public process or during the wayfinding discussion and the Plan Mahone Bay discussion. And I acknowledge that that motion did not clearly specify conditionality, but it was my expectation that if any information came up during those two processes, that would be an influence on the council's commitment to the logo. But there was nothing that came up during the plan review process or the wayfinding process.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and then Councillor Feeney.
Thank you. So basically, there was no public process, which is a problem to address the issue of choice of logo, which from my perspective, that's where we realized we did not do the right thing. Why, and hence why we have that public engagement process. Now we've instituted a public engagement process, and basically what you're saying, this issue showed us our failures, and we have addressed them in bringing in a policy, but we will not apply that policy to this issue in the way we've crafted it. You're saying, well, that issue is gone, let's forget about it, and citizens just forget how the process went, and let's live with the decisions we made. So that's where, for me, it sort of seems like we're proposing these are the values we want, this is the way we'll live our values, and then saying, well, we'll not apply those values to a decision that has led us to where we are right now in terms of thinking about public engagement. And that, for me, is problematic.
Thank you. Councillor Feeney?
This motion doesn't talk about revisiting the logo issue. The correspondence from one citizen talks about asking the town's permission to conduct a survey. That's what we're dealing with this evening. We're not dealing with relitigating for the 7th time the logo issue in this course as a response to this particular piece of litigation. The deputy mayor's perspective is well known. We've litigated this item 4 times. And as I've said over the last 4 times we've litigated this, I'm open-minded to changes and evolution down the road. What this motion is dealing with is our responsibilities as a council to respond to this citizen in a timely manner tonight. And what I'm saying tonight is, based on the meeting we had a month ago, where we also talked about this, and there was a motion that was not approved by council, is that this motion is pretty simple. Thank you very much for your letter. You are absolutely well within your rights to conduct a survey. But as of April 12th, 2021, we're not planning on changing the logo. I can't speak to what council's perspective will be on June 1st or July 1st or August 1st. And someone else can make a motion if they want to revisit that. But this motion is clear and honest about where we are tonight. We're not trying to hypothesize where we'll be 10 years down the road or 10 months down the road.
Thank you. Councillor Burdick, and then Councillor Nell.
Yes, there is a specific item on the agenda. It's a letter with a specific request in it. And this is a specific response to that specific request. Mine was the motion that was defeated a couple of months ago, I think. I again ask, if this is something that keeps returning, it does feel like a way to keep it from returning repeatedly is addressing it head on. That can't happen in this specific case, perhaps, but this maybe can be the kernel of a further discussion and ideas about it. Again, there is going to be, we're responding to this. If these folks go ahead with a poll, there will then be independently gathered information that we don't have control over, especially as a council, on a council matter. It's interesting then to think, well, what do we do with that? Is it going to be an entirely independent process? There are things that maybe, given the situation, would be, this is the town logo. So it feels like something that we would want to have some say in. So perhaps not at this time, but I do think that it has to be addressed, because it will keep returning. It already has. We have so many other things that we need to address and talk about, but we're prevented in a way from dealing with those things because we keep getting hung up on something that would be quite, to me, straightforward to address. Find out what people think. Who knows? Like I say, most people do think it's fine. Then we can move on. I just foresee this returning repeatedly, and I do think we have other things that we want to talk about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can we just, oh, I'm sorry.
Councillor Now was next, Councillor Carver.
Yeah, I think we have to deal with the issue as it's sitting before us tonight, and that is the letter from this citizen. And I think we are dealing with it and letting them know they can go ahead with their survey. If that comes back and it comes back to us, and then we have to revisit it again. Yes, when we made the original motion, we didn't have the process for the public that we now have. We now have something on the book saying that we will be going to the public with things from here on. But we can't go back and revisit every item the council has done in the past that didn't have the public input into it. So I think what we have to do tonight is move on with the letter that we've gotten. If it comes back to us with them having done a petition, then we have to look at that and take it from there. But for tonight, I think we're on the right track.
Thank you, Councillor Carver.
I essentially was wondering if we could deal with the question, which I think is as honest as it can be. It's clear. It responds to the letter in a clear and direct way. And we don't know what the future will bring. But I really am concerned about the discussion or the idea that we're not listening. We have listened, we've heard several times that approximately 66, 67 people who are known to be either residents or taxpayers in the town of Mahone Bay have expressed some dislike or concern about the new logo. I don't think it's a good idea for council to be governing or making decisions on the basis of what is really a very small percentage. I don't think it's a majority or a large number. What we've heard is from 67 people, which out of 900 or 950 people who are including taxpayers, is not a large number. So it's just a question for us as council. How do we make decisions?
Mm-hmm.
It's not always black and white. I acknowledge and agree that it certainly wasn't a perfect process in coming to the decision about the logo, but it was done. Council made a decision. It voted several times. And it's a decision that was made. And one of our councillors said at one of the discussions, there are other issues that we need to be paying attention to. This is a big issue in its way, but there are many other large issues on our plate right now. So I think it would be healthy to revisit the logo issue down the road, but not necessarily right now. I would rather be spending our time and energy on the other big things that we have on our plate right now.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor?
Just to move things along, I think we should just vote on the motion and move on. What I would say is that for me, the logo is not the issue. And for me, the big issue is not the logo. It's how we respond to citizens. And I think that's where, for me, I'm very uncomfortable with the way we handle this. But let's just vote on it and move it on. We have lots of stuff to cover tonight.
You're calling the question, Deputy Mayor?
You're the one who calls it, so I can't call it.
Okay. The question's been called for. Any other comments before we call for the vote? All in favor of the motion? Opposed to the motion? Motion is carried by a count of 4-3. Thank you. Okay, let's go to item number 5, which is correspondence information items. What is the wish of council? Councillor Wilson?
A motion to receive and file, your worship.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Deputy Mayor seconds. On the motion, comments or questions? Councillor Burdick?
Hi there. There are two correspondence items that I think are worth responding to and noting in the context of trees, the tree issue. So item 5.4, the letter from Wendy Priesnitz about tree cutting. And she did ask specifically about inclusion in the strategic plan. So I think we should note that that is under I think the final point in the strategic plan. And then 5.7, this feedback, which was on the Council of Canadians session, there was concern about tree planting there too, which is also, I think, covered in that item. So there might be some specific responses that we can make to those two citizens.
Okay. Any other comments? CAO?
Just with Councillor Burdick, did you want to make a motion to write back to any of these pieces of correspondence? Is that what
Yes.
you were thinking?
Sorry, that is what I was, yeah,
Okay.
but that would be my motion.
We'll deal with the other motion when we deal with this one, but we'll come back to that. Any other comments or questions? The motion is to receive and file, notwithstanding the follow-up motion of Councillor Burdick on specific items. All in favor? The motion is carried. Thank you. Councillor Burdick, please.
I'd like to make a motion that staff respond to the letters from Wendy Priesnitz and Susan Robertson about the strategic plan and trees. It's a sort of vague motion, but I think that we can refer them to the draft.
Okay. Thank you. Do we have a seconder for Councillor Burdick's motion? Councillor Carver, hand shot up. There's a tree involved. You've heard the motion. We will respond to the two letters on the tree question. All in favor? The motion is carried. Thank you. Let's go to staff reports. Mr. CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So as usual, we have a report to council here. This is the first meeting of the month for April, so only the council items to staff is updated, but get the whole report there. And Anybody have questions on that first updated part or any of the parts from March? Feel free to ask. I'll put it up on the screen if needed.
Counselor Wilson and then Counselor Carver.
I have a couple of questions about the report, pardon me, but if I'm getting this wrong, but because I'm not quite sure which report has which information and which I should respond to and which I shouldn't. So if I'm overstepping, let me know. First question, there was a thing about the watershed in there, and in my memory, we had a policy that when it was possible, the town of Mahone Bay, would buy land that impinged on our our source of water supply. Is that correct?
I believe that is still the case, CAO.
I don't think it's a written policy, but the town has looked for opportunities to do that in the past.
Well, the reason I ask is I just noticed last week that 2 pieces of property came up for sale in Oakland that go right from the Oakland Road up over the hill and down to the lake, side by side. Unfortunately, I think they're sold, but I just wondered if we had a position on that or whether it was just something that we missed.
Were we aware of that? Counselor Feeney.
Just to clarify, I think Councillor Wilson's right in that historical convention, and I can recall at least one land acquisition in the previous term but I believe the focus was to prioritize lots that were on the non-railway track side of the watershed as a priority. Because I think to your point, Councillor Wilson, a number of properties have come up on the railway track side, but I believe that in previous conversations and Dylan, you would know a lot more about this than I would. The CEO would certainly be an expert on this, but with the right of way from the railway track in the 66-foot distance from the middle of the track, there was always deemed to be a historical enough of a buffer to make it less of a capital priority. So I'm all for thinking about future generations on that topic, but I didn't think that the unwritten policy applied to property on that side of the railway track, but that's just one impression.
Okay.
CAO. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Do you have
I was
another
only
question for Counselor Wilson?
Yeah, I have a couple more questions. I would just note that we're still looking at October numbers for water losses, but be that as it may. On the capital side, I was looking for the list of all the various and sundry fixes to various traffic problems we have, including the 3-way stop at by the brewery there. And I couldn't find that list in this report. Was it missing, or am I losing something here?
CAO.
They're not individually itemized in the report. There were a number of different components, 5 different components, I think, in one project called the 2021 Transportation Project. That project's referenced in the report in the capital budget section, but it doesn't break down the different components of the project.
But if my memory serves, anyway, it doesn't really matter. What I was going to ask, because I know we're working on the 3-way stop as a priority. My concern is that we also think about as a priority a crosswalk somewhere in front of Rebecca's restaurant, because we have 2 new retail shops opening there in the next month or 6 weeks, and it's going to be, somebody's going to get really badly hurt there if we don't do something, because nobody pays attention.
Okay, thank you. CAO, are you responding to Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, I only wanted to note that that was certainly on the horizon, and we've had discussions with the property owner there about some improvements to kind of support the positioning of the sidewalk as well. Because obviously one of the challenges or crosswalk, because obviously one of the challenges it would just go into the parking lot right now. So we are working with the owner of that property to set that up. So shouldn't
Okay.
be an issue with the timeline, but we'll keep you updated.
Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Carver, you're next.
I'm passing. I've answered my own question. Thank you.
There you go. Councillor Burdick.
I have a few questions. I noticed on item 12 in council assignments about the reviewing the request for artisans at the BIC, if that was how that was coming along, just because tourist season, such as it is imminent. And should I ask the other questions now too, or should I wait for the response first? And
Well, CAO is gonna.
If you don't mind, Mr.
throw
Mayor,
us with his knowledge.
easier to try not to remember all the questions at once, if you don't mind. Yeah, the deputy CAO and myself recently had a conversation with the chamber, just verifying, essentially some of their plans for the season and how, obviously COVID continues to impact on some of those plans. So we are working on a draft of an agreement that would, essentially support, as council had, directed, the use of the limited floor space that can be currently used for commercial purposes in there for the suggestion about artisans. So we're looking at kind of a short-term agreement. I know that we've talked about a lease renewal, but given the chamber's current having to keep an eye on the developments of the summer, we'll probably be doing it as a trial run this summer. And so the agreement that we're working on as a draft we'll bring back to council is reflective of that approach.
Okay. Another one, Councillor Burdick?
thank you. Thank you, CAO. The other question I have in the Director of Operations report, item 7, about the long-term care facility. There was something about a review of the civil engineering plans, and I was wondering where we were at with that, just because I would note that there have been several correspondences from a citizen there who had questions about the development agreement and how it meshed, just to make sure the permit is in agreement there. I think specifically about height was a question there.
CAO?
Yeah, so as far as the engineering review, it is completed. The engineer's report is back to the development officer. My understanding from the development officer is that the development permit will be issued sometime this week. So when a development permit is issued, then there is a document that can be made available for public reference at that point. And I know that some people have made requests for that permit. So until that time, we can't release anything, but there will be an opportunity for review of that public document at that time.
Thank you. That's all. Thanks.
That's it?
Yeah, that's it.
You're letting them off easy. Anyone else have any questions about the report? No? Would you like a motion to, Councillor Carver?
Sorry, I dealt with my first question, but my second one was actually for the clerk. Number 3 in that section of the clerk's report around the update about the community bicycle route and public engagement. Can you just update about what the status of that is? And I'm asking partly here because there is concern about repercussions for trees around the proposed bicycle route. So where are we at with the public engagement and the process?
The public engagement report that was received by council laid out 2 phases for that. And we are still in the phase where we are encouraging people to read the documentation because we want everyone to know that it's there, have an opportunity to go through what's out there, what's been discussed, what's been brought forward to council. And then we will be having a public session or sessions later in the year. Looks like phase 2 was scheduled for April to July. So we will soon be changing our messaging to reflect that next step. But we're still pushing the information out, asking people to get informed because we
Okay.
want that informed participation.
And then that'll be done mainly online by asking people to respond online, or will there be surveys? And
Yes.
okay, yeah. Sorry to spring that question on you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. CAO, did you want to comment? I think you had put your hand up when Councillor Carver asked your question.
It was mostly as an offer to Maureen if she wanted me to, but I think she covered it. So unless there were any follow-up questions, I don't need to add anything.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions for the CAO or the clerk on this report? Entertain a motion to accept the report as presented. Moved by Councillor Burdick, seconded by Councillor Feeney. Questions on the motion? All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. Let's go to item 6.2, Town of Mahone Bay Strategic Plan 2021-2025, the engagement plan for it. Who will speak to that? CAO?
So just
Please.
to very briefly set the stage for everyone again, obviously this was deferred by council previously to await an appropriate draft of the strategic plan. And I believe, and it's obviously up to you folks to agree, that we have reached that point now. So as per some conversations earlier tonight, the council doesn't move ahead with adopting documents without considering the appropriate engagement plan that would go with that. And the staff have developed something here as a recommendation. So if anyone has any questions, happy to answer them. Our recommendation would be that council accept the action plan presented. And I think there's a motion in the report.
There is a motion, and the motion, CAO, for clarification, is just to approve the engagement plan. And there would be a
Yes, sorry,
follow-up.
I meant the engagement plan as presented. I'm sorry.
Yes, okay, good. Councillor Burdick.
I would like to make that motion that council approve the draft public engagement plan 2021 to 2025 and direct staff to implement the plan.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Deputy Mayor Kangata seconds. Councillor Carver, you look perplexed.
May I speak? Yeah, I am perplexed. I'm confused about why we're not approving the strategic plan and the engagement plan and directing staff to implement the plan. I don't get the distinction there.
Okay, thank you. Let's hear what Councillor Wilson has to say.
Well, I'm assuming that if we're having an engagement plan and the engagement plan is meaningful, that if people come back and say they don't like this or they don't like that, we'll change it. And that's the changed strategic plan is the one we'll ultimately approve, I would guess.
Got it. It would have helped my brain if at the very end it had said direct staff to implement the engagement plan.
Yeah. There's either the word plan is used too often, or there's not enough descriptors with them.
Could we insert the word engagement plan there at the end?
At the end of that statement?
Yeah.
So the motion would read, council approve the draft public engagement plan 2021-25 strategic plan and direct staff to implement the public engagement plan. Okay. Deputy Mayor Kangata.
Yeah, I understand it's COVID times, and also wondering with how things have gone so far, people being vaccinated and stuff, whether would be willing to support a small, doesn't have a lot of people face to face, for folks who do not like doing Zoom, do not want to be engaged via I guess the internet, and they want a face to face. there's some folks I've talked to who prefer that, and they're like, well, you put things on Facebook and we can't come there, and that's not where I want to be. So I wonder whether that's something we might want to consider.
So are you suggesting we would offer it as a Zoom discussion or an in-person face-to-face?
A Zoom and an
A
in-person.
Zoom and?
Yeah, and the in-person with a limited number that folks might be able to sign up and say you can keep it to a certain number that meets the COVID regulations.
And would having had a vaccination be a requirement to engage in that process?
And that would be a slippery slope.
Okay.
I think if we apply the COVID protocols of checking whether somebody has I guess a cold or symptoms that they don't show up, that probably should be more than sufficient. But I think, yeah, there's protocols out there that we can follow.
Okay. Councillor Burdick and then CAO.
I think that would be a great idea. I do agree that having the vaccination as one of the ways to get in there would not be useful, just because a large population can't and won't be vaccinated for a while.
Yep. Thank you. CAO.
Yeah, so the engagement plan document as presented actually calls for 2 different activities by Zoom. One of them is a public input session, essentially, the public information meeting session. Basically, this was presented to follow the same process we go through to adopt planning documents. So a public information meeting by Zoom would present the document, and then a public hearing would be required prior to adoption of the document to hear feedback from the public. So in that case, we have done with the case of a hearing, because it is a hearing, to make an extra effort for people to have the opportunity to put their views on record. My assumption would be in this conversation that the Zoom session to present the document is a supplementary to the document. People can read the document. They don't have to be on that Zoom session. So when we're talking about an opportunity for in-person participation, it would be on the hearing side of things. So if that's the case, I guess I have a question for council. Staff, early on in the pandemic, we did a trial run, worked, I think, pretty successfully, except we didn't have anyone participate, of having an option for a public participation in a hearing, whereby there was an opportunity to come to one location where staff were present, council was still meeting remotely, and members of the public could participate in the hearing via the Zoom arrangement that way. At the current time, I do believe, unless we're having a single file, one member of the public entering a large space with the council at a time, that we're limited to 10 people in a space. So for council to actually assemble in person to hear from the public would actually be quite challenging. My suggestion would be that we go with the option, if council feels it's necessary to provide an in-person for the hearing, that we go with the option that we did try out previously. I will note that previously we did use the town office for that, and we would, in this case, we'd have to find another location, but I'm sure that we could find a suitable location for the hearing and have council connected via Zoom. So that would be my suggestion, because I know we are currently still under the 10-person limit. And if that's council and 2 staff, that means a single file of anyone who wants to come in and present, and it would be quite a bit more logistically challenging.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carver?
Yes, I was thinking of the precedent that we did have on the public hearing for the nursing home that we held at the Legion. But I guess the limitation there is that it wasn't live streamed, if that then becomes the issue. But the space worked well, and there were public, participation at that one.
Yeah, there was some public participation though, and that was actually before the province had solidified. That was in the very first 3 days, I think, of the pandemic, and so it was before the province had solidified the 10-person gathering limit. So we actually did exceed the 10-person gathering limit on that occasion, And then later on, and Maureen can probably remind me of when, I think August or September, we had another hearing in which that's where I'm referencing council was still meeting on Zoom, but there was an opportunity for the staff to receive in person and set people up to speak to council if they didn't have the technology at home to do so.
Okay, thank you. Clerk?
The location that we used when we had that public hearing for the nursing home development agreement, as the CAO said, that was in the very first few days of pandemic restrictions. We used that same location for the election, and we had to have someone stationed to do the COVID check with everyone and do contact tracing information. So that is also a logistic issue, because part of that is then ensuring that people use an entrance door and an exit door. So it does involve, there's more staffing required. And in that case, we had to bring in specialized staff for the election to do that. So again, whatever council's decision is, I just think that's something to consider when planning.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor?
Well, one suggestion for me would be that we don't have to all be there as council. We can be in shifts. So if we arrange for a time whereby maybe we can split into half, and one set of folks go to one and then another go to the other, gives the public the opportunity to interact with council. It's not the whole of council, but at least some folks from council will have had the feedback. So that's something we can consider. But I'll go with what I do.
I'm sorry, what was your last comment, Deputy
I'll
Mayor?
go with what's decided today, but I just thought I would
Okay.
get that into
Okay.
there.
Are you suggesting that half a council would be face-to-face in person and the rest electronically, and then choppy change, or?
If we're doing more than one
Session.
round of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. CAO?
That was just going to be my note, Mr. Mayor. Not that this is a legally required hearing. This is a discretionary hearing, but if it was a legally required hearing, just to remind that all council members must be present in order to vote. So we would have to have people at each session, everybody, but some people in person and some people electronically, if we were going to do it that way.
Okay. Okay. Any other comments? So the motion then, council approve the draft public engagement plan 2021-25 strategic plan and direct staff to implement the public engagement plan. Okay, that's the motion. All in favor? The motion is carried. CAO?
Oh, so just for clarity, it wasn't amended, so we're just doing these things by Zoom? Because the actual document just says that these sessions would take place by Zoom, so I was anticipating that we were going to amend it if we were going to. I'm not that I mind. I think it's just logistically it's very challenging, but we just had a conversation about it, so I wasn't sure if that
I
was
think
very.
now that we've approved it, we could entertain a motion to amend the actual plan itself from
Sure,
the
if you want.
wording that's here that would enable the suggestion of the deputy mayor about being in person or being electronic. Deputy Mayor?
I would move a motion for staff to explore the possibility of having an in-person session that works for residents and council. And I think
an in-person session of the public engagement plan
yes,
around the strategic plan.
yeah.
Okay, do we have a seconder? Councillor Wilson seconds. Mr. Hyde.
I'm just concerned about the staff to explore part because of the timeline involved. So it was our intention to execute this in line with the budget process. So we essentially have the hearing no later than the first May council meeting when typically the budget would be arriving at council. So that's the 11th of May. So if we're going to report back to council on the 29th, which is our next meeting, with a recommendation and then meet hearing requirements for advertising will be too late for that. So I think we should determine, if we could this evening, whether there will be an in-person component to the hearing, and then we can leave the details to be worked out, but we wouldn't need to report back. So at a minimum, I think we could say, if council's so inclined, we're going to have an in-person component, and at a minimum, it would be what we did before, where staff just have a screen at a location. Or if council's not so inclined to do that, we could just go ahead with a Zoom. But I'm just noting that the timeline here, if council would like to complete this by the time that the budget process would normally end, or that's at your discretion.
Deputy Mayor, would you consider changing the word explore to schedule?
Yeah, yes, I would. I was just putting it as an explore so that I can give the CAO a little bit of wiggle room, but he wants us to narrow it down. So schedule an in-person rather than explore.
And we'll explore
Councillor
what kind of
Wilson?
in-person session.
Yes.
Councillor Wilson as a seconder, are you comfortable with that? Okay, you've heard the amended motion. All in favor? The motion is carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Maureen and I will get exploring, and we'll be in touch.
Well, let us know by 4 o'clock tomorrow, if you would, please, CAO. Long-term debenture refinancing. Our finance manager is not with us tonight. Councillor Feeney?
Mayor, I'd move the council pass the attached resolution for the pre-approval of the debenture issuance in the amount of $92,500 for a period not to exceed 5 years.
Thank you. This is a fairly routine occurrence. Seconded by Councillor Now. Okay, you've heard the motion on the question. Any comments? No? Okay. All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. Let's go to the budget meeting dates. April 19th, April 22nd. CAO, would you care to enlighten us?
Oh, well, it's just every year we do tend to put these on the public record at a regular meeting of council. So I know council had an opportunity previously to confirm these dates at committee, but we just wanted these up here for the public, and anybody who doesn't have them in your calendar, make sure they're in there now. You should be getting tomorrow an official placeholder for your calendar for the 19th, along with the background information. And that first meeting on the 19th is the budget presentation by Luke. We get some initial clarifying questions, of course, because people will have had a few days with the documents. And that typically that runs about 2 hours, and it'll be on the YouTube. And then from there, on the 22nd, we're getting back together, and that's really an opportunity to dig into council's questions, which you're free to send by email as well. Give Luke some time to work on it for the 22nd, and we'll start going through the budget from there. And by that time, we'll have a better sense of what more sessions we're going to need, but you can presume that there will be at least one additional special budget session the following week, and there's usually two more. And then we wrap up the process typically in the first meeting in May.
Okay, thank you. Questions for the CAO about the budget deliberation schedule? They're both on YouTube, CAO, the 19th and the 22nd, and any subsequent discussions?
Both on YouTube, and then if anybody, I guess we'll need to start reminding people if they're joining at like the second or third budget meeting, go back and watch the first budget meeting and get caught up on Luke's original presentation, because even further into the year, when you're interested, if you're a member of the public who's interested in the budget, you have an opportunity to go back and watch the presentation of it and get those additional details. And so it's great that that's available now as a public record.
Thank you. Comments or questions? Councillor Wilson.
Are those all-day sessions or afternoon only or evening or what?
The first one's an evening session for sure, and I believe we set the second one as an evening session as well. And then from there, if it's council's will, we could potentially do a daytime. We'll just have to see what works for everybody.
The second session typically is considerably longer than the first one, because that's when council gets into discussions around literally line item by line item. Or
But it can
issues
also,
that they have questions or concerns about.
we can also just end it for time if we need to and pick it up at
Pick
another
it up
time as well.
another
Yeah.
time, yeah. Is the information available to the public in advance of the meetings, Mr. Hyde, online?
Yeah, the original package will be available to the public. After that, we're just doing question and answer. So those are available on the YouTube. And then now with COVID, we're releasing draft written minutes as well within 24 hours. So the draft written minutes are up after each meeting as well.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? I don't think we need a motion on that. Councillor Burdick, housing needs assessment.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So yeah, this is an information item for council to consider, especially in advance of the budget considerations. It's been determined by SHAC that housing needs assessments are it's a good idea to help determine what the needs are for the area. And the suggestion has been made that it would to investigate the possibility of sharing the costs for it. It's a pretty good idea. We have fairly limited data here. The census is coming up, but this is going to further identify issues that many of which are shared between the different municipal units. So I was just, it had been noted that it's happening in Bridgewater. I think it's been brought to Lunenburg Council also. So the hope is that staff will continue this conversation also.
I've had this item added to the agenda for mayor's deputies CAOs, which is meeting tomorrow. Okay. So we should have some relatively immediate feedback from what the other municipalities are planning and what our role in that process will be.
Thank you. That's great.
CAO?
Just a question for Councillor Burdick, because I haven't been to the SHAC meetings in a little while. Obviously, a housing needs assessment was done previously on a larger regional scale with SHAC. So if we're talking about another regional needs assessment, did SHAC talk about, is it following basically and it's up on their website, the previous one, is it following basically that format, or was there additional information we're looking for this time around? I wasn't sure if it was more of an update or
sorry, CAO. I don't actually have that information in terms of comparing it to the previous needs assessment. My sense is that it was going to be pretty far ranging, but we do have two other members of SHAC here who have been part of the group for longer. So I would ask them.
Okay. Deputy Mayor is next, and then we'll go to Councillor Carver.
Yeah, from what I know, the data that was used for the 2016 SHAC needs assessment was 2011 data. So basically, it's quite old and needs updating. So from that perspective, this would be, I guess, an opportunity to update that. The other thought I wanted to inject, because I won't be at the meeting tomorrow, as you discuss with other mayors and deputy mayors and around the issue, is it would be key that as we conduct, if we agree on this, and as we conduct a needs assessment, that councils also talk about identifying key indicators that can be systematically tracked, so that we don't have to be spending this much money doing needs assessments or looking at what the profile of the community is. So maybe 5 or so indicators can be identified and can be tracked in some way, shape, or form. And there are ways in which that can be done as part of the needs assessment to identify those key indicators and figure out a system in how that data can be collected on a regular ongoing basis. So for instance, things like registers for landlords, things like that, that provide an opportunity for that data to be stored either within a municipality or regionally in some way, shape, or form. So as you talk about that, I would hope that you can inject that into the conversation too.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carver and then CAO.
Yes, exactly what the deputy mayor said, that the 2016 study data was really very dated at that time. Even it was already 5 years out of date. So it really needs to be refreshed, the information. And another piece of the conversation amongst the shack members and the elected, because there's now a small group, a subgroup of the elected officials that meet between the full shack meeting. So it's been an interesting opportunity to focus on the municipal issues. And the way I understood it was that there was a sense that an assessment might cost somewhere in the ballpark of $50,000, and that Bridgewater had budgeted $25,000, and it would be a practical, financial, as well as the benefits of the collaborative study if we could all go in together.
Mm-hmm. And hopefully be able to identify the issues and the needs for each municipality independently, and the sum total becomes the collective issue. Okay, CAO?
Oh, I just want to thank the deputy mayor for the clarification around 2011 census data, and then to point out that obviously if that's the intention, we'd be looking at doing this next year, because if we don't have the updated census data, then we're going to be 5 years behind again. So with that in mind, we actually have a little bit of time to figure out that joint approach.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carver?
I just wanted to ask the CIO if he's aware of how long it takes for the census data to become available. I mean, we haven't even started the collection of the data yet, so when might we expect the 2021 data to be available?
It has been, we've had an interesting history for censuses over the last couple of decades in Canada. If the last one's any indication, and hopefully it would be, typically the data starts coming out by the September following the year in which it was collected, and will take about 18 months for it all to be released. It depends on what sections of the data we would be looking for. I think mostly this is some of the first stuff that comes out. Economic data tends to take longer to come out.
Thank you.
So that's really 2 years down the road then.
Yeah, it's, I mean, it wouldn't be completed, I think, best case scenario, until 2 years from now.
Okay.
And I will note that council's strategic plan does, is looking at a housing strategy sooner than that. And, I think that there are some options to do local data collection. I think we've had a really successful experience doing data collection for a greenhouse gas program. And I think that there's probably some lessons there, but they may not be replicable to the larger community, the larger county. So I wouldn't want to say that it would preclude cooperation with everybody else.
Thank you. Councillor Burdick?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And those are great points, CAO. I think that we can do these things, if not concurrently, we could proceed on a more local level at the same time. Especially if it's going to take a longer period of time. First of all, there'll be the gathering of the information, then the putting the request for proposals out there too, and having all of the different councils agree on who would be obtained. But it does seem worth proceeding with ultimately, even if it takes 2 years.
When you talk about doing something locally, Councillor Burdick, are you anticipating a hired resource with the expertise in such an area, or is it something like we did with the GHD survey where we had a staffer who designed and undertook the project?
I can see it. I mean, it's not, obviously, it's an idea, not a thing yet, but it does seem like something that could happen on that second scale for more
Okay.
immediate answers.
Deputy Mayor, did you have a comment, question?
I was just happy with the clarification that Dylan put out there, that the collecting of these needs assessment data should not limit our ability to be able to work on a strategy. I think it'll be helpful as we roll out the strategy to really know the numbers, and we can use that sort of as our monitoring tool. But like you say, there's other options that we can use that are low, I guess. They won't cost us much to a certain extent.
Okay.
Yeah.
As an aside, there's an article in the Chronicle Herald this morning about the real reasons behind poverty and housing poverty in particular. And it talks about, not unlike the discussion we had at the Council of Canadians a couple of weeks ago, but a lot of the societal issues that contribute to persons having basically a disenfranchised lifestyle in our community. If you had a few moments, it might be interesting to have a read on that article. Okay, we have a motion, I believe. No, didn't make a motion yet. I thought Councillor Burdick made one. And Deputy Mayor seconded? No? Okay. Well, there's no real motion to make, I don't think, but please, Councillor Burdick, if you feel there is.
I guess I don't know if it's a motion, but that it be forwarded for consideration of the upcoming budget considerations. I don't know if that's a motion or just forwarding it to that particular situation.
Yeah, you can make a motion to refer to budget.
That's what I'll do. I'm making a motion.
Okay. Good for you.
To
Good.
budget.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Carver seconds. Motion to refer the issue to budget. We'll have more information when that happens. All in favor? Motion's carried. Let's go to the committee reports, Policy and Strategy Committee. The draft minutes are included in your package. CAO, are you speaking to this, or?
I can speak to. It would, yeah, normally the chair from a committee would report on it if there are any motions that need to be made. Otherwise, we don't necessarily speak to committee.
There are no motions here. There was a motion by Councillor Feeney at the meeting. Motion was carried, but there was no motion transferred to this agenda.
So I guess the only thing to highlight here would be that there is a next meeting, and that these agendas are published on our website. If members of the public wish to contact staff for the Zoom link to join that next meeting, I think it's coming up at the end of the month.
We don't have a date expressed in the minutes. Item number 7, next meeting. Says we adjourned at 9:48.
Oh, it's expressed elsewhere in the minutes. Sorry, I'm not sure how that happened. Up further in the minutes under number 4.
The fourth Monday of each month.
Yeah, so it should have been restated under next meeting. Sorry, that's not there.
Okay. The fourth Monday of April is April the 26th.
Busy
So
month.
the next meeting, for the information of the public, will be on Monday, April 26th. Okay. No other questions or comments on that one? You've also got the Lunenburg County
Oh,
Senior.
I think Deputy Mayor has his hand.
Yeah, I have
I'm
a
sorry,
question.
Deputy Mayor, I'm looking
Yeah,
everywhere.
No, that's fine. We had talked about the idea that we will be with this at this council meeting is where we'll be talking about the I guess the agenda or draft agenda for that meeting, or did I get that wrong last time when we talked about it?
Yeah, you're right. We did say that, and this is just going to be something we'll have to get used to. So thank you for bringing it up. That we would confirm the agenda at the council meeting prior to, which in this case is this one. And in this case, the motion did suggest, it went ahead. In this case, the motion at the committee suggested that the
Yeah.
agenda would be 2 items consisting of the affordable house, or sorry, which was the local improvement bylaw and recreation would be the subject. So council can confirm that now, or if there's any other suggestions.
And then that same motion listed a number of items that will unfold over the course of the year at that meeting's agenda.
And typically, yeah, we will revisit that and pick the items, I think in the same manner. So the report from the previous one will suggest what the committee felt would be the next items, and then at the council meeting, we'll have the opportunity to confirm. We didn't talk about whether that confirmation would happen by motion at council, or if a motion would only be needed if there was going to be some change to what was intended. So that's we'll have to determine that now, either way.
Well, I think given that the intent was, as the deputy mayor has suggested, that the issues would be discussed at council, that I would suggest that the chair will entertain a motion that at the next meeting of the strategic or policy planning committee or policy and strategy committee scheduled for April the 26th include a discussion on the local improvement bylaw and also recreation. Councillor Feeney.
So
moved. Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Deputy Mayor? You've heard the motion. All in favor? The motion is carried. Thank you.
I have a second question, if you don't mind.
Yes, please.
In terms of the process, we had also talked about the idea that with that committee, that there will be no motions in that committee. There will be recommendations to council because it's a committee. So in the minutes we've talked about, it says motion carried there. So I wonder if that needs to be rectified.
Well, just to clarify that one, if Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind. So the way that the committees work is almost every meeting that a committee passes is that the committee recommend to council that. The only ones that just start with that have to do with the agenda and functioning of the committee's meetings themselves. So in this case, that was one where, I understand there's a bit of a line there, but typically you would have motions like that the committee approved the agenda for the meeting, that the committee approved their last meeting minutes, or that an item be placed on the next meeting agenda would be the kind of motions that they do. And otherwise, they could only, and it does specify in our committee's policy, they can only otherwise exercise powers through recommendation to council.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm just wondering why council would make a motion for that committee to take on those 2 items, why that committee would do anything else but, i.e. not take on those 2 issues. Why would we do another motion of the agenda at the time of the meeting if council has already by motion directed us to do that? Councillor Feeney.
Yeah, I think, Mayor, what we have here is just an unusual circumstance of the first meeting where our protocol wasn't, defined yet. And I think the spirit of that motion was to get some consensus so that we could address it at this meeting, so that we could have a meeting in the end of April. So I think your point is fair enough. And now that the normal cadence, but I'd expect that, a month down the road, if we successfully discuss those 2 items, there needs to be some process where the council can figure out what we want to talk about at the next meeting. And we can either, have that discussion at the committee, or we can have that discussion at the council. I guess it's just the function of what's the best use of people's time, depending on the agenda. So
the committee would recommend that items C, D, and E be discussed at the May meeting.
Right.
And council would pass a motion that would be what we're going to do.
it just strikes me that there's a little more, there's more opportunity at that committee meeting to have that 5 to 10 minute conversation about the next list of priorities than
Yeah.
to do it within the context of a council meeting where time is limited. But
Okay.
anyway, we'll see how it goes.
Deputy Mayor, are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, I'm quite comfortable with that. I think we've forgotten why we had a very long conversation
Well,
that
we're streamlining things, right?
that brought us there. So I'm quite okay with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lunenburg County Senior Safety Program monthly report. Any questions or comments on that? Councillor Carver?
Yes, I'd just like to comment that there's been a slight change in the way that the reporting is presented this time around, where the nature of the referrals is broken down with some numbers attached. So that's very instructive in terms of the numbers, for example, of elder abuse, financial abuse, social isolation, needing support and well-being issues, mental health and addictions are high up there. And the side note that the housing related safety issues are permeating many of the situations that are being addressed. So there are situations where seniors are without housing, and it's been a challenge.
On the service in municipal units and the one beside it on date to date, it shows Lunenburg being 1%, Town of Mahone Bay 7%. And then in the number of, oh, I guess it's just home visits. It's not relevant to the location, is it? The date to date, data to date issues.
No, they're not. The two tables aren't connected.
Totally
that way.
independent. Okay,
Yeah.
good. Oh, all right. Any other questions for Councillor Carver? Okay, let's go to Region 6, Waste Management. Councillor, now you're the Region 6 representative?
The biggest thing I'd like to point out in there that we're still working with trying to get the province to implement EPR. So, because the manufacturers should be responsible for a lot of this waste management costs, and they're collecting it. The manufacturers have it built into their prices now. It's just that the province of Nova Scotia hasn't implemented anything to let us get in on those points. So,
Yeah. Any questions for Councillor now? Okay, thank you.
Oh,
Councillor
Mayor,
Carver?
I did have one question about the minutes. I just noticed that there was quite a lot of information about personnel issue in the minutes. So that struck me as a bit of a surprise. Is that common, or is that typical?
we had lost a couple of members of the personnel. We just had a change with the COO, and since then we had a controller who was only there for a month or something like that, I think, and then he decided he was going to leave us too. So the COO now is taking on those responsibilities until we find somebody else.
Okay, I might follow up with you separately with my question.
Is there any privacy issue that?
Well, it was an evaluation of evaluation of staff. I was just really surprised to see it there in the minutes. So
You're going to follow up directly with Councillor now, Councillor Carver?
yeah, yes, I will.
Thank you. Okay. Anything else? Any new business? No new business. Then let's see if any of our citizens who may have joined us on YouTube before we close this part of the meeting and go to the in-camera session. Does anyone have any questions?
Worship, there are no questions posted.
And how many hundreds of people are watching?
There are currently 18 people watching.
Good, good. That's like 18 more than the last one.
Yeah.
Glad to hear it. I'm glad that there's a bit of interest out there in what we're doing. Okay. We will entertain a motion to go in camera. Moved by Councillor Burdick, seconded by Councillor Now. All in favor? We'll take 5 minutes before we continue the